Begin the meeting of the Metropolitan Council. Today is Wednesday, August 22nd, 2018, and I call the meeting to order. The first order of business is the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. The next order of business is the approval of the minutes from our August 8th meeting. Could I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Moved and
Second.
seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The minutes are adopted. Next, we have public invitation. At this point in the meeting, members of the public who wish to address the council, typically they're on matters not on the agenda, may do so. I would just ask you to limit your comments to 3 minutes. I do understand that there's some representatives from the city of Medina. We have the item on the agenda, but if you'd like to speak, we would welcome you. So if you want to come up, and just please introduce yourself for the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and council members, for the opportunity to speak. I know it's not your normal course of business. My name is Dusty Finke. I'm the planning director at the city of Medina. Again, thank you for all the committee members who have looked through and provided comments on our plan to date. And thank you to your staff for your assistance and efforts throughout our review process. I especially wanted to recognize the efforts of Lisa, Raya, Angela, Frey, and the rest on putting together the online version of the local planning handbook, which was a tremendous help as we went through our process, and was recognized with the National Planning Achievement Award from the National APA, as I'm sure you're aware. So that was a great tool as we went through. As noted within your report, Medina has planned for approximately half of our forecasted growth over the next 10 years for development higher densities above 8 units an acre. This is consistent with Metropolitan Council's Housing Action Plan in order to provide opportunities for more affordable and lower price options for housing within the city. This is a significant proportion of the city's projected growth over the next 10 years as compared to our historical development pattern. So we've taken an effort to identify those opportunities for higher density housing in the city, again, accounting for approximately half of the growth that we're forecasted between now and 2030. So a really significant proportion. Medina sought to allow for the development of a large portion of this higher density housing immediately after the effective date of our comprehensive plan. As you know, we're pretty early in the process here from the other communities in the metropolitan area. So we're hoping to allow for that development right away, even though we're some time away from 2021, which is the date identified within the Met Council's allocation of affordable housing needs throughout the metropolitan area. So nonetheless, the city would like to see development of that be available immediately upon the plan. I provided a letter which you have attached to your report, which lays out how the city sees this being consistent with Metropolitan Council policy. Nonetheless, the Met Council staff has identified as a potential inconsistency because there is a potential that some of the development would occur in 2018 to 2021, which does not match perfectly the 2021 to 2030 allocation of affordable housing need. I just point out that those needs were based on forecasts back in 2015 provided by the Metropolitan Council, and really that information is consistently in flux because of market conditions, actual construction, and as communities go through this process as well. It seems which side of 2021 the affordable housing or higher density housing occurs is probably less important rather than the totality of what's possible between when the forecasts were put out in 2015 and ultimately what's achieved by 2030. Nonetheless, the draft you see in front of you, the plan that's under review, has staged the high density housing in Medina for after 2021 in order to be consistent with your plan. The city and a number of the property owners, not surprisingly, would rather see flexibility to allow that development immediately after the effectiveness of our plan between 2018 and 2021. While delaying that development to post-2021 may provide technical compliance with the Housing Action Plan, that doesn't seem in the best interest of the city, the Met Council, or the property owners in this case. So my impression is that some of the members of the Community Development Committee may have seen this request as reasonable as we were discussing it. And if I'm correct, I urge members to press the point and hopefully find a way to direct staff to permit the city of Medina to allow that flexibility on that staging for developments prior to 2021. Thank you again for your time, allowing me to speak, and all your efforts.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to address the council? I don't see anyone else signed up. So seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. Next, we'll hear the reports of the standing committees. The first is Councilmember Commerce, the Community Development Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The first item is item 2018-207. It's the City of Plymouth Greenway North Comprehensive Plan Amendment, and this action is to authorize the city to place the amendment into effect. The proposed amendment does a number of things. It re-guides 5 parcels totaling 24.9 acres from living area rural 2 to living area 2. It will facilitate development of a residential subdivision consisting of 20 new single-family lots and 103 townhomes. And notably, the site is located in the northwest portion of the city, east of County Road 101 and north of County Road 47. So, Madam Chair, I move that the council adopt the attached review record and allow the City of Plymouth to place the Greenway North Comprehensive Plan Amendment into effect. Find that the proposed amendment does not change the city's forecast, and advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for forecasts and housing.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. Councilmember Commerce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The second item is item 2018-218. It's the same week item. To consider an action to match new bonding out of the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. The legislature this year created and the governor signed into law a new bonding authority using Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund dollars as part of the 2018 bonding bill. Minnesota Management and Budget will be issuing the sale of these trust fund bonds this October, making funds available to agencies in November. 5 agencies received appropriations from these newly created trust fund bonds, including the Metropolitan Council. The council received a $10 million appropriation for the regional park system with the following language: for the cost of improvements and betterments of a capital nature and acquisition by the council and local government units of regional recreational open space lands in accordance with the council's policy plan as provided in Minnesota statutes. This appropriation must not be used to purchase easements. So the council does not have a policy with regards to matching these new trust fund bonds until this point. And since 1994, council policy has been to match every $3 of state general obligation bonds with $2 of regional parks bonds. So on behalf of the committee, Madam Chair, I'd like to move that the council match the $10 million of this year's 2018 Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund bond appropriation with regional parks bonds of $6.66 million in regional debt.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. Next, Councilmember Commerce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The third item from the committee is item 2018-219, also same week item, and this is to consider an action to request the Moving to Work program designation for our Metropolitan Council Housing and Redevelopment Authority. The Moving to Work program is a federal designation that provides a great amount of flexibility in how federal rent assistance programs are administered. The designation allows a full range of administrative ease in program operation, as well as the ability to waive federal regulations and program rules in certain cases. Obtaining this designation from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, would assist with solving the HRA's structural imbalance and allow innovative program design, allowing the council to tailor programs to market conditions and the needs of low-income families in our region. So, Madam Chair, on behalf of the committee, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the Housing and Redevelopment Authority to make a formal request to HUD to have the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority's Moving to Work program designation extended to the council's HRA.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Member Latowski?
Yeah, thank you so much. I am really excited to see this. It sounds like a little kind of wonky, but actually it will be a game changer for the way that the HRA works. I sit on the board of the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, which has had this moving to work authority for a number of years now. And it just allows them to be flexible and to try new things and outside of the HUD rules that were adopted in like the mid 30s. So it's an exciting opportunity, and I thank the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority for reaching out to other housing authorities in the area and offering to go to HUD together to say, let's extend our reach with this program. So I was excited to see this.
Excellent. Any other discussion? Member Munt?
Madam Chair, when Community Development took this issue up, I asked Terry Smith if we could achieve efficiencies without laying off our HRA staff. And her answer to that was absolutely yes. So I'm comforted that what we're talking about is not layoffs, but rather operational efficiencies.
Terrific. Any other comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. Next, we move on to a joint report of the Environment and Community Development Committee by Councilmember Commerce. Sorry, you have to keep reading.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This item is 2018-215. It is an action to authorize the City of Medina to place their 2040 comprehensive plan into effect. A couple of items about background. Medina is located in Hennepin County, of course, surrounded by Corcoran, Maple Grove, Plymouth, Orono, Maple Plain, Independence, and Greenfield. And Thrive designates Medina in two community designations. The northeast one-third of the city is designated as emerging suburban edge, and the rest of the city is in the diversified rural designation. Between now and 2040, the city is forecasted to gain approximately 1,200 households. Through the planning process, there's been ongoing coordination with the city, particularly in areas of wastewater and housing review, including a May meeting with city council members and staff, and council members from this council and our staff. In the wastewater area, the plan included a proposed removal of 760 net acres from the Blue Lake long-term sewer service area, which was balanced by an equal amount of acres that were added to the Blue Lake area due to regional infrastructure improvements in and around Loretto, which the Environment Committee found in conformance with the 2040 plan. In the housing space, the city submitted supplemental information which made the city's plan consistent with housing policy. The city's plan acknowledges the city's share of the region's need for affordable housing in the 2021 to 2030 decade, which is 244 units. These 244 units are based on forecasted growth for 2021 to 2030. And the plan also guides sufficient land at higher density of 8 or more units per acre to support the city's allocation of affordable housing need in the decade 2021 to 2030. So council staff found that the city's 2040 plan conforms to regional system plans, is consistent with council policies with the proposed amendment to the community designation, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. At the meeting, there was significant, at the Community Development Committee meeting, there was significant discussion about the allocation of affordable housing need for the 2021-2030 decade and guiding a sufficient amount of land to meet that need. So, Madam Chair, on behalf of the committee, I move that the council adopt the recommendations of the Community Development Committee as detailed on page 1 of the staff report, and also adopt the recommendations of the Environment Committee as detailed on page 2 of the staff report, and adopt the CDC and Environment Committee advisory comments on page 5 of the staff report.
Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. Next, we'll move on to the Transportation Committee. Councilmember Schreiber.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members, 2018-182 deals with the renovation and expansion of the existing Hayward bus operation and maintenance garage. The project will modernize the facility based on the additional buses, staff, and changes in bus fleet mix since the garage was constructed in 1984. On June 20th, 2018, 5 bids were received and opened publicly. Roshan provided the low responsive and responsible bid of $9,409,490.50. I therefore move, Madam Chair, that the Metropolitan Council authorizes award and execution of a construction contract with Roshan for the amount of $9,409,490.50 for the construction of the Hayward Garage modernization project at the Hayward Bus Garage.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion on this item? Member Melander.
Yeah, just a comment. I know that recently this, and I'm familiar with the contractor, and recently they finished a project on one of the Minneapolis Public School projects, and a great project because kind of a business model that I would think that all of us would subscribe to existed, and I would just hope that that same type of project would happen on the renovation of the Hayward. So I'll talk to Brian and just make some suggestions, but good experience, and as long as they're using the model that is consistent with the one that they used on the Minneapolis Public School System project.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. Next, we move on to other business. 2018-212 is a roll call item. I'll call on Councilmember Chavez to read this one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is the matter of the preliminary 2019 Unified Operating Budget and proposed 2018 payable 2019 tax levies. This business item recommends adoption of the preliminary 2019 Unified Operating Budget and the proposed 2018 payable 2019 tax levies. It is consistent with the budget and levies presented to the Council on August 8. It sets 6 p.m. on December 12 in the Council chambers as the time and place of a regularly scheduled meeting at which the budget and levies will be discussed and the public will be invited to speak. In October, the Council will be asked to adopt the public comment draft of the 2019 Unified Budget that will be the basis for collecting public input. The proposed 2018 payable 2019 property tax levies are based on the preliminary 2019 Unified Operating Budget and provide funding for ongoing council programs. The proposed property taxes reflect an increase of 2% over final 2017 payable 2018 levies. Under state law, the final levies certified by the Council on December 12 may be lower than or equal to the preliminary levies we are possibly certifying today. Madam Chair and Council members, the proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council adopt resolutions 2018-11 through 2018-16, adopting the preliminary 2019 Unified Operating Budget and proposed 2018 payable 2019 tax levies.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Then I think we want to do the presentation from Ms. Bogey as follow-up from the last
Yes.
item before we vote. So if you'd like, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Council members, at our last meeting, as we presented the budget, we got a couple questions. Councilmember Lander about our change in our budget over 2011 to 2019 that we're proposing. And while we definitely have a plan to come back in December and talk about the accomplishments of this council, and I'm not attempting to do that here. I did want to come back and talk about just some of the dollar changes in the budget and kind of what's just drove the dollar changes. So that's what we'll try to do with this presentation. So this first slide shows our operating budget sources for revenue in 2011 under a $671 million operating budget compared to our proposed operating budget in 2019 of $1.1 billion. And as you can see, our revenue sources have been historically well defined, and we operate under the same revenue sources today as we have in the past. And proportionally, we've grown within the parameters of those revenue sources. We receive about a third of our revenues from our charges for services, wastewater and fares. We receive about a third of our revenues from state revenues, state appropriations and MVEST. and a little under a third of our revenues from the federal government, from local governments, and from our property tax levy. Over the past 8 years, our budget has increased by $346 million. And all other things being equal, if we had an annual inflation rate of about 3%, we would expect about a $200 million growth. Of course, all other things aren't equal. And the next few slides, I'll try to talk about some of those factors that are driving our budget increase. On our expenses side of the budget, we're seeing kind of the same expected thing. It tells that same proportional story. So between our 2011 and our 2019, proportionally, we're spending about the same amount on operations, so salaries, contracted services, and other on this chart, so 2011 to 2019, and the same for debt service and pass-through. They're in both cases, they're taking about the same proportional share of the budget. So it really tells the same thing because our expenses kind of live within our revenue sources. We would expect them to have that same kind of shape of pie as well. So as we drill down a little bit on the budget and look at what's changed kind of in this 8 years, the pass-through budget for grant programs has grown by $34 million over the last 8 years. This chart highlights that change by program, and as you are aware, we are experiencing some budget pressures in our housing program. This program has grown from a baseline of about 6,100 vouchers in 2011 to 6,500 vouchers today. The federal government funds this program based on the prior year's utilization, and as we've discussed, the rental market pressures really heavily impact the program increases there. For livable communities, in 2014, we implemented a strategy in our levy to maximize the LCDA levy to create a transit-oriented development program. That strategy contributed a $3.8 million increase to our levy and also to our operating budget. And that resulted in $22.7 million of additional grant funds available to that program since we implemented that strategy. So in 2011, our livable communities levy was $8.2 million. In 2019, it's $12 million. The suburban transit providers have also seen an increase of $10 million in their statutory and regional allocation. That's about $1.25 million a year over the last 8 years. And then our I&I grants program, $17.5 million in I&I grants contributed to $67 million in infrastructure investment across the region and contributed to 9 billion gallons of reduction in untreated water getting into our wastewater system. Just some examples on this slide of some of our TOD successes. Mill City Corridor in Minneapolis, that's a $36.8 million development. It had $2 million of grants awarded. The Artery in Hopkins, a $60.6 million development with $2.4 million in grants from the council. Vandalia Tower in St. Paul, $4.6 million investment with $679,000 in investment grants. So just kind of some examples of where we've used that investment in new funds. Debt service in our operating budget has increased $39 million since 2011. The largest increases in environmental services where our debt service went from $90 million to $139 million. This was driven by about $1.1 billion in capital spending over that same period. 75% of that spending was focused on interceptor rehabilitation and about 25% of it on our liquids and solid treatment plant improvements. As Ned presented earlier in our presentation last week, we are experiencing a bubble in our debt service trend that we expect is going to level out now in the near future. But we've also managed that debt service by increasing our PAYGO program. So we increased by 10 million our PAYGO program in our operations budget, and that led to $45 million of spending towards capital projects and over 8 years, and about 16 million in present value savings of the interest had we issued debt for that same $45 million of spending. In transit, we've talked about the pressures of the transit debt service levy on our overall levy. This chart is a bit skewed because it doesn't really show that growth because we had a $10 million refunding in 2011. And so if we take that out, then this would otherwise show that growth in the transit levy that we've been talking about. And then in parks, we've talked about the need to look at our funding and our matching strategy there, and we've seen that decline in debt service for parks. Our operations budget has also increased by about $259 million. This chart shows the breakdown between salaries, contracted services, and other. The increase in salaries reflects both the application of our labor agreements as well as new positions that support service delivery and administration. Some of the major factors in our operations budget are new services that we've brought online. The Metro Green Line is certainly the biggest item there. The Metro Green Line has a current budget of $40 million. And along with the Metro Blue Line, we have about 420 FTEs budgeted for the operations of both the Green Line and the Blue Line. Our light rail fleet is aging well, and we maintain it to a state of good repair. Our light rail overhaul program added about $5 million to our annual operating budget. We have a number of engines there, the Bombardiers and the Siemens. Those Siemens engines have about 1 million miles on them. So aging well because of our maintenance program. Although we don't budget for the A-Line bus rapid transit separately, I did want to add this to the chart as new service, and because it has increased ridership on it as well, that contributes to our operating budget cost. So one line that does add to our budget as well is our Red Line bus rapid transit. This was our first bus rapid transit line, and as part of the CTIP dissolution, the operations costs of the Red Line moved to the council. So that was about a $2.5 million increase to the council's operating budget. Metro Mobility, we've had a lot of discussion about, and the ridership growth is about 5.7% average over the years. And also we made a significant change in our last budget as it relates to minimum wage for contracted services. In 2011, the Metro Mobility budget was $41 million, and that has doubled and is $82 million proposed for 2019. So those factors of ridership growth and contracted services in the last 10 years have been about 10 million. In the last 2 years have increased 10 million. And finally, we, as part of our levy strategy, also have maximized our general purposes levy. That increased our budget by $4.5 million, levy in 2011 versus levy in 2019. That has provided $25.5 million since we implemented it, and we targeted that to initiatives that you see listed here. So, Madam Chair and council members, this was kind of a quick overview, but hopefully it gives you some takeaways of the things that have occurred in our operations from 2011 to 2019 that kind of fit with what we're presenting for the 2019 budget.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this or discussion on this particular item? Member Melander.
Just a comment. Hey, I appreciate that. As I use the example of riding my 1972 Schwinn bike, the he that asked me, and I saw him again. This is just helpful so that, and I know that, later on you're going to have a much broader view of things that we've done here that we've all got to participate with, but I know it's extra work, but I really appreciate it, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. I also want to point to the budget and brief document that gives you kind of a short takeaway to use for those questions as well.
Thank you. Member Munt.
Madam Chair, I always ask Mary, what does this mean for a typical taxpayer? And she had her staff crunch the numbers. So somebody who owns a $250,000 home will pay $63 approximately with this new levy. to me, that's about the best bargain you get from any government agency because we're talking buses, flushes, parks and housing, economic development, and great planning.
Thank you. Any other comments? Member Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Over the process of discussing the budget and the levies, I voiced my concern about the money moving for the HRA to supplement the a subset of the region. For now, I realize that is just something because of pressures we have that are immediate. It's important for us to respond to now. I've spoken with the chair a bit about it, and I believe that we're in alignment in thinking that there needs to be a working group or task force and interaction with our external partners who utilize us as the agency for the implementation of their HRA services. And with that in mind, I'm comfortable voting with this because I just want to make sure that we don't default to paying for that service going forward. However, do look forward to having the discussion with the agencies or the areas that we do provide services for.
Yeah, thank you, Member Barber. I agree with that, and I think this is a challenge that we can't solve on our own and really do need to do it in collaboration with our partners across the region. So I think that that's a very good suggestion. Any other comments on this item? Seeing none, I think this is a roll call item. So Emily, please call the roll.
Rodriguez? Schreiber?
Aye.
Munt?
Aye.
Barber?
Aye.
Elkins?
Aye.
Dorfman? Cunningham? Latowski?
Aye.
Reynoso?
Aye.
McCarthy?
Aye.
Rummel?
Aye.
Melander?
Aye.
Kramer?
Aye.
Commerce?
Aye.
Chavez?
Aye.
Wolf?
Aye.
Cheremoff?
Aye. Motion is adopted. Next, the next item is 2018-225 is the appointment and reappointment of people to the Livable Communities Advisory Committee. We're proposing the reappointment of Mayor Heyman Roland, the mayor of the city of Apple Valley, to continue her appointment as the chair of the Livable Community Advisory Committee. We have 3 additional new appointments, Farbe Maxus, Denisa Farley, and Kim Lindquist, and then 3 reappointments, and I would entertain a motion to support these appointments.
So moved.
There's a second. Any discussion? Member Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say I'm really pleased to see that Kim Lindquist will be on the committee. Rosemount is no longer in my district, but I worked with them a lot when it was before the redistricting, and she has a lot of insight into the development challenges in the suburbs and in revitalizing older downtown areas. So I think she'll bring some good experience to the group.
Thank you. Any other comments? I also appreciate the folks who are willing to continue to serve on this really important committee. I just want to make sure we thank them. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. Next, we have an information item from Janine Clancy on the Minneapolis CSO permit termination. This is an exciting item, so welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the council, and thank you for having us here this evening, and thanks to the Environment Committee to hear this one more time. I'd like to introduce Katrina Kessler, who is with me this evening. She is the Director of Surface Water and Sewers for the City of Minneapolis, and will be presenting this item to you this evening. The purpose of this presentation is to provide an overview, background, and key milestones that led to the application by the Metropolitan Council to terminate the NPDES permit. That NPDES stands for National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit and the State Disposal System permit. The presentation will identify next steps that MCS and the City of Minneapolis will be taking to ensure compliance with this MS4 permit and the MCS Metropolitan Wastewater Treatment Plan permit. So, Madam Chair, members of the council, this presentation attempts to succinctly tell the story of decades of cooperative work, integrated water management, solid policy, consistent investments, and overcoming the technical, financial, and political challenges associated with separating a once connected water and sanitary sewer system.
once connected, stormwater and sanitary sewer system. In 1984 and again in 86, 1991, and 97, the MPCA issued a joint MPDES permit. The permit authorized release of combined wastewater and stormwater during wet weather events. The releases were allowed in order to avoid hydraulic overload of the wastewater system during wet weather events. As noted above, work was done to better define the city's and NCS's infrastructure because it's quite connected, and substantial work was done to separate the stormwater and wastewater systems. Earlier this summer, in conjunction with the City of Minneapolis, MCES applied to the MPCA for termination of the joint permit. The permit application was considered by the MPCA, and based on data that has been reported by our two agencies since 2001, the permit was terminated. While Katrina and I have the opportunity to present this really good news story to you this afternoon, both of us recognize that much of the credit goes to policy leaders such as yourselves and practitioners who worked for the cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Metropolitan Council before either of us began working in our current roles. The slide before you showed some highlights on the path to terminating this permit, and at this time we'd like to share some of the history and how we got to this point.
So again, I'm Katrina from the City of Minneapolis. When we talk about this, we like to give some foundational background because it really started decades ago, as Janine highlighted, and that really starts with the passage of the Clean Water Act, which was catalyzed by the 1969 Cuyahoga River fire. That Clean Water Act originally focused primarily on industrial wastewater discharges and evolved over time to include municipalities and then stormwater. And the diagram on the left of the slide shows you the permits that the city of Minneapolis holds and how the Clean Water Act is administered in the state of Minnesota. So at the top you have the EPA, and then you have the Pollution Control Agency that oversees that National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System framework within the state. In the city of Minneapolis, historically there were two permits, one for stormwater and one for combined sewer overflows. The stormwater permit is held jointly with the Park Board, and the historic CSO permit was held jointly with the Metropolitan Council.
So prior to 1938, our wastewater system was built as a combined sewer system that began in the construction of that in the 1880s. Both stormwater and untreated wastewater was conveyed to the river by a single system. So we would predominantly convey wastewater, and then during wet weather events, it would be combined with stormwater as well as during snowmelt in the spring. In 1922, construction started on the first separate storm sewers around the lakes in a newly developing areas of the city. And in 1934, construction of the Metropolitan Wastewater Treatment Plant began in St. Paul, and it began treating stormwater and wastewater in 1938.
Sure. So as you'll hear, this story is not unique to the city of Minneapolis. Cities that were founded in the late 1800s and earlier all had combined sewers, and that occurred through the city until the mid-1900s. Janine mentioned that we started building separate storm sewers with new developments, but it wasn't until most of the roads became paved in the 1960s that we started comprehensively putting storm systems in. And even at that time, there were connections all over the place. And this story, again, is not unique to the city of Minneapolis. St. Paul also had a combined system, and St. Paul and the Met Council similarly had a combined sewer overflow permit. And it was because of concerted investment on the part of the council and the city's leadership that over $330 million was spent up through the early 90s to find where connections occurred, separate them, and build sufficient infrastructure both on the wastewater and the stormwater side to provide service. Ultimately, this work resulted in the separation of 4,600 acres of drainage of stormwater from the sanitary system that no longer flows that way.
In 1980, the Metropolitan Waste Control Commission developed a Metro Plant facility plan, and this was in response to a consent decree by the EPA. And this facility plan recommended storage and treatment to respond to wet weather flows. At the time, that was the approach that was recommended by the EPA. After development of the facility plan, the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul during the public comment objected to that facility plan. And so we started over and we looked at a new study and agreed to a new CSO permit in 1985. In 1986 to 1995, the MPCA, the cities, and the Metropolitan Waste Control Commission agree on a CSO permit with a 10-year separation program, followed by 5 years of sewer system effectiveness evaluation. And the Metropolitan Waste Control Commission built interceptors to help address capacity issues, including the Minneapolis East Interceptor, Beltline, Trout Brook, and several other projects within the city of Minneapolis and St. Paul to support the separated systems. And today, our wastewater systems and stormwater systems are conveyed predominantly in separate systems. Wastewater is treated at the wastewater treatment facilities, and stormwater is treated according to best practices and is available for infiltration where appropriate or for reuse. Prior to applying to the MPCA for termination of the CSO permit, MCES in Minneapolis wanted to observe the response of the system to wet weather. Please note on this slide that in 1984, annual overflow of combined stormwater and wastewater to surface water bodies was about 350 million gallons a year in the city of Minneapolis alone. As work was done to separate the systems, note the diminishing amount of contaminated water that was released into surface water bodies. In Minneapolis, the last CSO, combined sewer overflow, was in 2010, where 2 overflows occurred which were related to an infrastructure failure. A storm tunnel failed and drained into a deep sanitary sewer. The results that you see on the screen required a very large investment by the communities as well as MCES. And now I'd like Katrina to share some of the work that was done in Minneapolis to achieve these results.
So in Minneapolis, we're taking an integrated approach when we think about our Clean Water Act permits and the goals, and thinking about how we can best maximize the public dollars and leverage partnerships. And the bullets on the right really show some of the types of work that we engage in this integrated planning. First, which is done in joint coordination with the Met Council, is the light rail planning. Also, there's lots of development and redevelopment that's happening in Minneapolis and has been happening for the last half decade. And that needs to be informed by understanding where we have sufficient sanitary sewer service and where we have other water needs. And so the picture up here is actually an image that's taken from our hydraulic and the hydraulic model that we use to model the storm system capacity, because as we removed clear water from the sanitary sewers in the city and pushed it to the storm sewer, we also experienced changes in land use and changes in precipitation such that we have flooding today where we historically didn't have as much flooding. This visual is in the area of the future Van White Bottineau Light Rail Station in the Bassett Creek Valley of Minneapolis. And the blue colors, the light blue is predicted flooding during the 10-year storm event. The dark blue is predicted flooding during the 100-year storm event. And the highlighted buildings in either orange or red show impacted structures. So knowing that we want to have transit-oriented development with partnerships in an integrated way to manage water, these types of tools help us make decisions that can maximize public dollars and help us meet our Clean Water Act goals. The bullet on the slide, on the last bullet on the slide, which is, it's okay, it's on the next slide, is the stormwater tunnel. So this is another large component of our infrastructure in the city of Minneapolis. The city of Minneapolis has 900 miles of sanitary pipes and about 600 miles of storm pipes and 16 miles of deep storm tunnels. One of the storm tunnels is called the Central City Tunnel, and that underlays like the entirety of downtown and the most densely developed part of downtown. This tunnel is actually the tunnel that we worry about the most in terms of hydraulic capacity, and is the tunnel that failed in 2012 when we had a moderate rain event that pressurized the tunnel such that the water found its way out of a crack, pulverized through the sandstone, penetrated the wastewater pipe nearby, and then overwhelmed the wastewater pipe, which resulted in the sanitary overflow. So these tunnels are 80 to 100 feet underneath downtown. And when it's raining, they're full, and the manholes that are 80 feet up are also full, so they have 80 feet of pressure pushing down on them. This project has been identified through our comprehensive modeling, meaning that we need to expand this section of the tunnel to provide additional capacity for the land use in the city of Minneapolis and primarily in the downtown area. This is a project that we are in the feasibility study stage and is slated for construction in the next several years. And just this 0.7 miles of tunnel, which is the most downstream, oldest, most constrained part of the system, will be about $40 million to expand. So thinking about ways to manage water upstream and in a way that maximizes land use elsewhere is important, because we don't want to have to make this type of investment in other places. And then the last example of integrated planning, thinking about not only flooding in downtown, but flooding across the city. You see images from the neighborhoods, as well as water quality and flood mitigation projects. We have wet pond examples, infiltration basin examples. We have a combination of green infrastructure where we've added storage under bikeways or storage under roadways and swales and treatment on the side. Just highlighting the fact that as we address the aging infrastructure in the city, we also want to maximize opportunities to improve water quality, whether that's on the sanitary side or on the stormwater side, and plan for a more resilient future.
So in addition to the physical improvements by the community that Katrina just mentioned, we have also a number of council policies and programs that have supported the success of this program. First of all, the II program, and we've been working on this a long time. Since 2003, I actually served as a public works director, a local community member, as one of the first task force members, and that policy was adopted in 2005, and that program remains pretty much intact as it is, and communities are working very hard to mitigate II within their local collection system. Council adopted a policy that we would not build additional capacity to treat excessive II, which also created that additional push for communities to address II. And then communities now in this next comprehensive plan go around have a requirement that all communities will take a look at private property sources of II, and will look at a way to mitigate those sources in the 2018 comprehensive plan. And then very importantly, as well as our own capital improvement program to invest in our own infrastructure. So I just want to mention to you that the II program has had a significant amount of progress. We've seen population growth. We've seen annual average precipitation increase. And even in addition to all of that, our annual wastewater flows to our wastewater treatment plants, not only on a daily basis, but in wet weather conditions, have decreased. And that's a success story. We also, as recommended by the II Task Force, we've developed a number of educational tools. The website before you is the toolbox that was developed for property owners as well as our communities that we serve. It was a toolbox that was developed by our regional communication staff, our environmental services staff, and with the assistance of some outside help, we developed a toolbox that we feel is really meeting the needs of our customer communities and educating folks about II. And then finally, one of the things that's really important is our ongoing capital investments in the region. And you can see that we have a number of projects that oftentimes appear before you. We work hard to protect public health, the environment, and ensure adequate capacity of the wastewater system in order to ensure growth. As Ms. Bogie mentioned in her presentation, we've invested over $1 billion in asset renewal in our wastewater infrastructure in the last 10 years, and about 1/2 of this investment is in the conveyance system where we see the II entering the system.
So Janine's early slide showed that there were a number of milestones that were important in preparing us jointly to be able to apply for termination of the combined sewer overflow permit. And one of them was the reissuance of the City of Minneapolis's municipal separate storm sewer system permit, or the MS4 permit. And that permit was issued in February of this year, taking an integrated approach. So kind of along the theme of thinking about how to address Clean Water Act goals with a limited pot of public dollars. That permit recognizes the historical connectedness of the infrastructure in the city of Minneapolis, and then also requires us to make progress on both the sanitary sewer connections that remain, but also the storm sewer connections that remain, and then puts the city in the driver's seat with regards to prioritization for each of those programs.
And as Katrina mentioned, because of the connectedness of our system, we have engaged in a joint study with the City of Minneapolis where we will work to identify existing and future system limitations, and we will develop a conceptual plan for asset renewal, reliability, II mitigation, and minimize the risk of overflows, which meets our customer level of service and objectives of the cooperative agreement between the City of Minneapolis and the Metropolitan Council. And then some additional steps that we plan to ensure compliance is continued investment in the regional wastewater assets. The II program in our next phase is to really work with customer communities to develop a program that addresses their unique challenges within their community. The financial support that we ask for the council to support as we approach the legislature every year for private property, II mitigation, as well as public infrastructure. And then we have a joint study with Minneapolis that I just mentioned, but we also need to do a similar type study with the city of the city of St. Paul. And we believe that these recommendations will help us remain compliant with our current terminated permit. So I just wanted to mention just one last thing. I did a little bit of research about what other regions are in fact experiencing. The EPA continues to work with communities who release untreated wastewater and stormwater into surface water bodies because it is a risk of public health and to the environment. In 2017, the EPA released a list of communities which have entered into a consent decree or an agreement to address the public health risks associated with managing a CSO system. The estimated cost to bring some combined sewer systems into compliance are noteworthy. Washington, D.C. has a consent decree of $2.57 billion. Indianapolis, $1.6 billion. Chicago has $1.7 billion. And Kansas City's consent decree is $2.383 billion. These are costs that we, instead of building infrastructure that is used only in wet weather events, we can invest in our infrastructure in a way that we think manages the assets to the best use of the region. So with that, I'd just like to mention our Thrive principles. Sound asset management practices have provided a framework for stewardship of the wastewater system that supports a prosperous region. The wastewater system protects public health and the environment. Managing our wastewater and storm sewer systems separately have led our region to sustainable practices such as minimum impact design standards, green roofs, best management practices, the II program, and many others. The water resources that we enjoy contribute to the region's livability and viability, and the work is ongoing. And while we're not done, we'll continue to work at it as we have in the past. The principles of integration, collaboration, and accountability will ensure that we maintain compliance with the city's MS4 permit and the Metropolitan Wastewater Treatment Plant permit. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Member Rummel?
Well, it's not really a question.
Or comment, sorry.
It's a comment. So often the Environmental Services brings to the committee, bits and pieces of projects that we're working on, and we never get to see the long-term full impact. And so when we received this presentation the other day, I thought, this goes back 50, 60 some odd years of collaboration, forethought, really smart thinking on the parts of whether they're municipal leaders or Metropolitan Council leaders, and it's just a testimony of the kind of thinking that, at least in my years on the Met Council, have permeated the way we do business, this collaboration, long-term thinking, thoughtfulness. How many $1 billion Washington, D.C. has to,
Look it up real quickly.
7 billion or so?
2.5.
$1 billion. Chicago, how many $1 billion they have to invest to keep the dirty stuff out of their rivers and streams. We've taken care of that. We don't have to spend that money. And I just think it's a good news story. I think it's something that we don't tell enough people the impact of the kind of work that we do here. So I advocated for them to bring this presentation to you, and I hope we will bring it to the Legislative Water Commission so that the Legislative Water Commission can appreciate especially our requests for I&I assistance. So that's my little 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea. I agree that this is a really good news story and really appreciate you guys bringing it to the full council. It's, I think, really important to share this with folks, especially given that it's been so many years of really thoughtful planning and investments across the region. I think it's one worthy of highlighting. Any other comments? Member Elkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the city of Minneapolis also deserves kudos for the looking forward and all of the major road projects in the downtown area, like when we did the Mark II project or when the Nicollet Mall is rebuilt. We dig them up completely and completely underdo all the underground infrastructure as well, which is really farsighted.
Excellent. Any other comments? Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Next, we'll move on to reports. Our council members, do you have any reports that you would like to share? Member Munt, and then Barbara.
I had 2 really fun experiences in the last 2 weeks. I spoke with the Sierra Club at a Reclaim Your Power workshop in the West Metro, and it was so exciting to see them organizing students from Hopkins and Minnetonka high schools around clean energy. And these young people really are passionate about a clean energy future. And what surprised me is that they were so savvy about the comprehensive planning process and how they can use that as a lever to get other governmental agencies to recognize the importance of clean energy. And of course, they made the pitch for us to convert to electrically powered zero-emission buses by 2030. And yesterday I had a ball. I went with the Minnesota Food Access Network on a bus trip around the region to see how people are doing urban agriculture. And we went to a farm in Egan where people grow fresh fruits and vegetables that they use to stock the church food shelf. And we went to the farm where it's called the Wazupi farm in Shakopee, where the Midwakanton Sioux tribe has paid for a farm where they grow purely organic food to help the tribe move away from the occurrence of diabetes and heart disease and obesity. And we saw the gardens along the Blue Line, and we saw the Upper Harbor project on the north side of Minneapolis. So it was really fun to talk to planners and to farmers and to food advocates about how important comprehensive planning is to that work.
Thanks. Thank you. Member Barber.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. So last week we went out and had a great meeting with the Chair and also Councilmember Wolf with the Shakopee Midwakanton Sioux community. It was a fantastic meeting. We had an opportunity to sit and have great discussions with their leadership council and talk about land use, transportation policy, transportation planning, and very significantly water. Got to see some of their work that they're doing that's quite innovative out there, which is really interesting. And we also got to tour their cultural center, which is still being built, but I think understood them right. I think by next summer it should be open, and encourage all of you to go check it out because it was quite an amazing building. So,
Member Barber is a very good and adept booster of her district. She was also promoting that I attend the Wachipi over the weekend, hosted by the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux, and just had a fantastic time. So this is another time where I've done repeat visits after my official visit over the weekend with the family. Really had a tremendous experience. Any other members would like to share anything? Member Rummel.
I hate to keep talking about water, but MOSAC, the Metropolitan Area Water Supply Advisory Committee, met yesterday. We now meet every other month, and I sometimes think that those of us who serve on these advisory committees don't have an opportunity to share what we do. And thanks to Lanya Ross and our staff at MCES, the way we are doing our meetings now, we trade off with the Technical Advisory Committee and then the MOSAC, which is now really a policy committee. We're entering into some very deep discussions about the pollutions that get in our water and the land use impacts of the water that we have, and the water that we get, especially the people who use surface water from the Mississippi watershed district, that whole 1/4 of the state that filters down. And we're just beginning these deep conversations about how we influence, because we have no control of who does what to their land and water north of us or upstream, but how we begin to influence and engage with these other entities that impact the water that we use, whether it's groundwater or drinking water. And I was just very impressed with because we have people who are water suppliers, those people that are on the ground and making the decisions, no matter which of the 109 cities you live in, as well as elected officials on this committee, and their understanding and their commitment, and I think a very growing interest in collaborating with each other and figuring out how we can get other support outside our districts to ensure that the water, if we have about another 1 million people moving into the metro area, this is a big concern. And there are some things happening in our rivers that are beyond our control down here. And I'm glad to see that we're thinking more broadly than just our little 7-county area.
No, thank you. I guess another update that I would just share is I had the opportunity to spend some time with the Metro Cities Policy Committee this morning talking about just the last year, but also some policy items that may be forthcoming in the next legislative session, and really had enjoyed that conversation. So thank you for that invitation. Any other comments, reports to share? Regional Administrator, Council? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Any discussion? All those in